Hello everyone and welcome to Uncharted Parenting, a podcast brought to you by Encounter Youth. Parenting is one wild adventure. It's full of twists, turns and plenty of uncharted territory. But don't worry, you're not navigating it alone. We're here with you. And each episode here on the pod, we dive into some real conversations, expert insights from some amazing professionals from various fields, and honest stories to help you find your way in this parenting journey. I'm your host, Louis, the Education and Parent Coordinator at Encounter Youth. Before joining the team here, I enjoyed 9 years serving as a police officer in the South Australian Police, but most importantly, I'm the proud dad of 2 boys. Welcome to Uncharted Parenting because, let's be honest, no one really has a map for this journey. Let's dive in. All right, Lael, it's such a thrill to have you on Uncharted Parenting as a guest. So I know you and I have spoken before, but it's an absolute thrill to have you on the podcast today. So thank you for joining us.
Well, it's my pleasure.
Now, Lael, there's probably not many people out there that don't know who you are, but just for those that maybe that are listening that don't, I'm just gonna just share a few of your accomplishments. So, Lael, you began working in childbirth education in 2004, working with couples during pregnancy, birth, and as a postnatal trauma counsellor as well.
Yep.
And then fast forward a few years, you then created the About Birth online education program, which is a way for people to learn about pregnancy and early parenting in that journey. You were an aware parenting instructor for 8 years, ran regular groups for mothers to connect and share their stories, and also ran workshops as a part of that program. And then you also delivered sex education to high school students for 5 years, and then created another program on the back of that, the Connection program. Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah. And then following that, I'm really briefly skimming over these, by the way, but there's probably a lot more to it than what I'm describing. So in 2019, along with a colleague of yours, you created the Aware Parenting podcast, which to date has had over 3 million downloads. And look, if that wasn't enough work for you, Lael, what you did after that in 2021, you finally saw a vision of yourself come to life, which was the Woodline Primary School in Victoria, which I believe is still going strong. So, and you also regularly appear as a parenting expert on Channel 7's Sunrise, and most recently have been involved in the launch of a documentary that I was luckily was able to see last Monday, Seen the Film, which is a feature-length documentary which explores the transformative power of personal healing for parents and the scientifically supported effects of such healing on parenting and its impact on child development. Now, that's quite a list of accomplishments I've just gone through, and spanning a wide range of time as well. But there's one thing that isn't on that list, Lael, and that is that you're just such a genuine, amazing human being to speak with, and it is genuinely a thrill to have you on the podcast today. So thank you so much. And yeah, let's kick it off. So how is it? How is everything going?
Yeah, good. Well, thank you for that. It's always interesting, isn't it, when someone kind of reads your bio stuff and I go, oh, yeah, God, I have done quite a few things. Or sometimes I go, yeah, no wonder I feel tired because, you know, all the balls in the air. Look, it's great. I mean, probably the thing I often say when I'm speaking to parents is, yes, I've done all these things and created a school and written books and, you know, done all the talks. But actually, first and foremost, my most important job is I'm also a parent. I've got 3 beautiful children who are nearly 25, 21 and 17. And I always often say, you know, no matter what I've studied or learned, it really is by raising my kids that I think I have learned the most. And I think, you know, so much of what I have learned and studied, they've been my guinea pigs, unfortunately, poor kids. Sometimes something will happen in my family and my kids will look at me and go, don't you put that in a talk? And I'm like, okay. No, it's cute. They're very proud, very happy. No, I feel in a very, very blessed position. You know, at the moment, as you said, I'm touring with Seen, the documentary, which is really amazing. We created some really great courses for parents on the back of that course. And it's a really important documentary that I think is just speaking to, you know, the work that we have to do too as parents. We're so good at often, turning towards children and, why are they bad or they wrong? And actually, often children are responding to their environments. And so much of parenting is really about us reflecting on how we're turning up and how we were raised. And, they're tricky conversations to have, and it's not easy stuff to lean into. But I feel really blessed that I get to kind of travel around the country at the moment having those conversations and just connecting with people to help them understand themselves better so that they can be the parents they want to be.
Mm. Well, yeah, it is an amazingly powerful documentary. I was lucky enough to be a part of the Adelaide screening last week, which was, yeah, it really is an amazing documentary, and probably a thrill to be a part of, as well as for yourself, Lael. But and then I've also, you mentioned a couple of things there I didn't even mention in that bio just then about the books that you've written either. So that's just an extra thing on top of that as well. And you're 100% right. Sometimes it is difficult, isn't it, when to have that inner reflection on ourselves when we're so, trying to keep in touch with the things that are going on around us, whereas we really don't stop to think about those things that, what our parents taught us, and how that's affected the way we parent too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it requires a level of consciousness, which is not something we necessarily talk a lot about, but I think for many, many generations, we often, I say when it comes to parenting, we either do what was done to us, we do what society tells us to do, or the third option, which is ideally where we want to direct parents, is to learn to trust your intuition and look at the child in front of you and ask, what is it that they need and how am I turning up for them? But I think we have to, always come back to a place of curiosity that so often when we are parenting, we default to the imprints in the ways that we were raised, even if we swear we'll never do that. So often we're like, I'm not going to be like my mom, or I won't be like my dad. And sometimes we swing really far in the other direction just to really make sure that we don't. But a lot of the time, because it's quite unconscious and ingrained in us, we end up bringing those same patterns forward. And I think parenting is just the most raw and brilliant opportunity to look at all your own crap and to actually sort out your stuff, and our children are like the perfect mirrors for that. And especially teenagers. I mean, teenagers are just, I have such a sweet spot for teenagers. I love them so much. Not only after raising 3 of my own, but working with teenagers for 5 years. I just think teenagers have this brilliant way of speaking a truth that we often don't want to hear.
Yeah.
And, as they're trying to figure out who they are in the world and separate from us a bit, it can really push your buttons and bring up a whole lot of stuff. Like I worked for a long time in that early kind of parenting space. And I feel like parents get to a point where their kids are maybe 7, 8, 9, 10, and they feel like they've got a bit of a handle on it. It's not the challenges of little people anymore.
And then puberty hits.
Yeah, and then puberty hits and those tweens and teens come in and you're like, whoa, here's a whole other skill set that's needed at this time. And, I just think parenting is just the most amazing invitation into looking at your own stuff and looking at how you turn up and really examining kind of the values and who we want to be and what we want to pass on to our kids, because it's very hard for our kids to be something if they can't see it. Exactly, we say kids can't be what they can't see. And so it's such a beautiful invitation to look at, what we're modeling to our kids, but how we're turning up for them.
You mentioned something just a second ago, Lael, about and we've spoken before this podcast a couple of weeks ago about the importance of role modeling, and that phrase that you said, which is a beautiful phrase, is they can't be what they can't see. And our kids, they really do absorb everything around us like sponges, don't they? And I think as parents sometimes, I mean, I certainly do this. I have a lot of self-reflection after something's happened, and I've got my eldest son is 3 years old at the moment, and I know he's not a teenager yet, but there's that phrase "teenager" really is actually true. And I quite often find myself afterwards, after something's happened, and maybe I've gotten a little bit frustrated, and I often reflect and go, that's how he's gonna act when he's a parent, maybe one day. And so, is there a formula, Lael, or is there a way in which we can be better role models to our kids, or there probably isn't a formula, is there? But it's probably a lot of.
I don't think there's a formula, but I think it starts with absolute curiosity. I often say to parents, who do you want your kids to be in the world? Like, let's just start with that. And so they might say, I want them to be courageous and I want them to take risks and I want them to be kind and empathetic and I want them to see the value of hard work and I want them to, give to others and all those things, right? So, like a whole list of qualities or values that we hope our kids carry forward. And I'm like, brilliant, beautiful, beautiful things to put out there. And then my next question is, and are you living that? Like, do they see that modeled in you? Because we can so often want our kids to be empathetic and kind, yet we can be feeling super, super duper stressed and be at the edge and just yell all the time, when they're not doing what we want them to do. Or we might want them to be really kind, respectful humans, but then we sit there and we, talk about people behind their back and criticize and judge, and they hear all that, right? And they go, oh, that's what you do, right? That's how you talk about your friends or your family.
Mm,
I think it's really important that we pause for a minute and think and take a look at what am I modeling to my children here? And I want to just also say at this point, we are all doing the best job we know how, right? And we are usually doing what was done to us. So
mm,
always when I talk about this, I have to say you have to bring a big dose of compassion into this conversation for yourself, because parents classically beat themselves up more than anyone. They're like, I'm getting it wrong and this isn't okay. And we can be so critical and harsh to ourselves. And I think it's really important that we take a beat and just go, wow, parenting is a really, really tough job. And yeah, maybe there's things that don't feel good. And what is it that I can do to help shift that? What is it that I need to change in my world? Or what is it that I need to be aware of in how I'm responding and reacting to my kids? So I
mm.
think we have to couple it with a bit of, bravery to kind of lean into these uncomfortable places, and a massive dose of compassion for how hard parenting is. And especially in this day and age, I think it's one of the hardest times to be a parent. I think, 30, 40 years ago, life was a lot simpler then. And these days we are juggling all the balls in the air. We are, having to work, look after our kids. We've got the impact of social media. We have the pressure of our children comparing themselves to the world, not just the kids they used to go to school with. There is a lot
Yeah.
that's going on. So I think we have to be really firstly kind to ourselves and go, this is a really tough job at the moment. And also what is working and what is not. And so I don't place blame on parents. I'm just like, God, I know how hard this is. This is a really, really tricky job. But I really do invite you to pause for a minute and look at, where is their disconnection with my kiddos? Like, where is their conflict? Where is their stuff that's feeling really hard? And so often what we want to do is we just want to point the finger at our kids or
Mm.
the school system or all the things. We're pretty good at doing that. And I think sometimes we have to pause and go, all right, is there a space in this where they might be responding to me? And how am I turning up for them in those moments? So I think when we look at, well, how do we explore that? We just have to we go where the tension is, and we look at, well, what am I modeling here? Or what is coming up for me? Or where am I getting reactive? And I often always say to adults, if you want to know where your stuff is, just look where you get triggered, right? That's where
Yeah.
you got to turn towards. And whether that's because you think your child's not listening to you, or whether it's because they won't do their homework or clean up their room, or whether it's because they're being mean to their younger sister, we have to lean in there and go, right, what might be going on for our kids, firstly, and how am I turning up for them in those moments?
Good. Yeah, that's beautiful. You mentioned a few things in there, Lael, about uncomfortability, and there's a lot of uncomfortable conversations, especially that probably you would have experienced when you were delivering, the sex education side of things in high schools, and it's an uncomfortable topic to sort of have to speak about, and
Mm-hmm.
one of those taboo topics, I guess, that teenagers really they don't want to speak about, do they?
Mm.
Especially to their parents, it's like those cringe things that they're like, oh, I don't
Yeah.
want to talk about that.
Yeah.
And part of what we do at Encounter Youth is we go into high schools, into secondary schools in
Mm-hmm.
SA and some interstate as well, and deliver alcohol and other drug education.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's one of those topics, isn't it? That they don't want to. They know it's out there, and
Mm-hmm.
it's part of our Australian culture,
Yeah.
um, and but they just don't want to talk about it. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess, as parents, how do we approach those uncomfortable
Yeah.
topics, those uncomfortable conversations? I know you've probably had experience with this already,
Mm.
or maybe even in the thick of it still. But
Mm.
yeah, how do we approach those sort of conversations?
Oh, that's such a good question. And I firstly want to just again offer lots of compassion to parents to go, it's really hard to do something that hasn't been modeled to you. So when I used to teach sex ed, I would teach it to teenagers, but then I would also run a class for adults, for parents, called How to Talk to Your Kids About Sex. Because we
Yep.
know, like drugs and alcohol, these are really important conversations to have. Because if we don't give children the right information, well, then they turn to the internet to find out, right? Because they're curious and we know what that information looks like, right? Which is usually
Mm.
not ideal. So, I want to just firstly start by saying to parents, and when I used to run these classes, I would say, put your hand up if in this room your parents sat down and had a really comprehensive chat to you about consent, about sexuality, about intimacy, about all these things, right? And really, maybe one person in the years that I was doing it
Mm.
put their hand up and said, yeah. And I was like, wow, you are lucky. And he said, oh, my mum was a sexual health nurse, so we spoke about it all the time. And I was like,
Yeah,
wow,
there you go.
you're lucky, right? But the majority of people didn't because, they didn't have those conversations either. We'll just pretend it's not happening. So I firstly just want to say to parents, it's really normal and understandable that these conversations feel awkward. But this is where we want to upskill ourselves a little bit to say, a lot of the research, especially actually around sexuality education, is that the children would actually rather hear it from their parents, except their parents are often just feeling a bit too awkward. So the kids are like, oh no, this feels hard and, embarrassing. So what we want to do is we want to get informed and we want to be curious. And I think as adults, whether we are learning about drugs or alcohol or just intimacy, relationships, all those kind of things, there's some amazing, brilliant resources out there, like what you guys offer, that kind of do the heavy lifting for you. So you can go there and you can read up all this information. There's lots of brilliant books out there as well that can be really such an excellent guide for parents to know how to have these conversations. I often say to them, it's really important that we get across this. And you get the information and you practice talking about it. So whether you practice talking to your friend about it or your partner about it so it doesn't feel so awkward, and then sit down with your kids. And what I used to say to my children is, I know you probably don't want to have these conversations right now, but part of my job as being your parent is to keep you safe and to keep you
Mm.
safe in all these places. And so I want to make sure that nothing is off the table here. We can talk about drugs, we can talk about alcohol, we can talk about all the different topics, because I think it is really important that you are going to have questions and you know that it's safe enough to come and ask me. I will never judge you for anything you ask.
Mm.
And I will always try and answer your question as honestly as I can. So I think these chats that we can have around some of these sticky topics are conversations that we have to have many times. It's not just one chat. I think
Yep.
it's a lot of checking in. We need to talk to the kids about the internet. We need to be talking to them about the dangers of what's online. We need to be talking to them about the risks and their natural curiosity. And I think that this is one of the things that I think parents miss. I mean, ideally, we'd all just love to pretend it doesn't happen, but we were all teenagers. We know what it feels like when you all of a sudden the world opens
Yeah.
up and you're curious and you want to try things and your peers are doing it. I think it's really important that we just name it. We just go, it makes sense that you would be curious, and it makes
Mm.
sense that you you might want to try things, or people are telling you to try things. And how I used to frame it with my kids is, my number one thing is that you are safe. And so
Yeah.
safety is always going to come first for us. So, that means we want to know where you are. It also means that if you're in trouble or someone's in trouble, one of your friends, it does not matter what time of night it is, you call us, we will always come and get you. And we won't judge you. We want to be the safe place that you can come. Now, when we can be brave enough to start having these conversations, and even if our kids are like, stop it, mom, or I don't want to talk about it, keep it light, be like, I
Yeah.
know you don't want to talk about it, but this is part of my job here. So I want to make sure that you're informed about, what is happening and, the impact on your brain if we drink or take drugs. And I also want you to know about contraception and how to stay safe. And I also want you to know about, how we be respectful in relationships and consent and all those kind of things. So they are important conversations to have. And I think, again, for any parents, it is bringing them up in a lighthearted way and just having a conversation, opening it up, then bringing it up again, and making it so that our teens know, hey, this is a topic that we can come to you about. Because I think that is probably one of the most important things when it comes to children, is we want our kids and our teens to know that you are the safe place and that you will listen, that they can bring the hard stuff to you. And we have to give them enough evidence that we're not going to judge them and then we're not going to fix them, but we're just going to listen to what's going on for them.
Yeah. I guess support, isn't it? Instead of that, yeah. Something someone said to me a few weeks ago was, not everyone wants to be fixed. Rather be they want to be supported more so.
Yeah.
To get to that point of understanding.
Mm.
And I guess you mentioned a couple of things in there, Lael, but one of the things you mentioned was that natural curiosity of I guess adolescents, young adolescents, teenagers, young people,
Mm.
however you'd like to word it. But I guess sometimes as adults, we get to this. I mean, I'm 30 years old now, and I get to that point, and it's like, 15. When I was 15, that's a long time ago. And like as a parent, you're like, you forget about what that natural curiosity was
Mm.
like,
Yeah.
but I think there's sometimes a bit of a disconnect there amongst parents and their understanding of young
Mm.
people's brain development in some cases.
Yes.
And I mean, I don't
Yes.
pretend to be any expert on brain development, but
Mm.
one of the things we speak about in our seminars at Encounter Youth is actually brain development,
Yeah.
and so young people can understand it,
Yes.
but often we find there's a disconnect there between parents understanding that and young people
Yes.
understanding that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so I guess how is there a way that we can, so is it just basically reading and keeping up to date with things, or is
Mm.
it how do
Yeah.
we bridge that gap of, I guess, of understanding?
Yeah. There is my favorite book for parents raising teenagers is called Brainstorm, which is by Dr.
Okay.
Daniel Siegel. And there's actually this really brilliant YouTube clip. I used to show it in some of my talks. I'll send it to you so you can put it in your notes for
Good.
people to look at. And Daniel Siegel Dr. Daniel Siegel talks about the 4 qualities of mind that happen as children develop and their brains develop through puberty. And he explains it so beautifully. I'll probably do a really butchered version of it right now. But one of the things that always sticks out to me is, he talks about the brain pruning, as in, getting rid of what it doesn't want, and then it creating new neural pathways in the brain for development, all that kind of stuff. So there's so much going on, in their brains and their bodies, they're developing. And a few other things that stand out to me, what he talks about it, he often talks about how in this development in a teenage brain, there is a deeper desire for dopamine hits, which is that pleasure reward response. And when it's used positively, what happens is teenagers take amazing risks. It's like, they become brilliant at skateboarding, or, they start creating incredible art, or they get up on a band and sing, or, they go into the debating club and, they put themselves out there. They take risks in ways that fulfill that need for dopamine. And the flip side of that, though, is if we don't give them pathways to experience that, they'll often do kind of stupid risk-taking stuff like jump off the roof into the pool, or, think it's fun to climb something when really that's, climb a crane when you shouldn't, like stuff like that. That's what my son did, just to keep it real, everybody. Even though I am a parenting educator, my teenagers still did heaps of stupid stuff, right? I love that. My son, climbed and got in trouble for climbing crane. And I was saying to him, buddy, what were you thinking? And he just goes, I don't know, I just wanted to climb something. And I was like, dude, I'll take you rock climbing. Like, come on.
If
Right?
there's other ways we can do that, mate.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really good thing to understand and remember, that we need to create opportunities for teenagers to take risks, because it fulfills this part of their brain, which is really about that dopamine hit and activating something within them. It also, again, part of that beautiful quality of the brain changing is they often get really passionate about stuff. So they fuel their energy towards things that they really care about, which again is why I think it's so brilliant that we invite and should have teenagers part of our big discussions around what's happening in the world. Because what happens as their brain is developing is they activate other parts of their brain, which is all about innovative thinking. It's all about thinking outside the box. And again, when we can channel that in ways, it's brilliant what can actually happen, of what these amazing teenagers can come up with as their brain grows and develops. And then I think, there's also those parts that we know are quite important about that individuating from us. So they pull away from us to figure out who they are outside of our family unit. And that can feel very challenging sometimes because, what can often happen is, our kids don't want to hang out with us much anymore, or, they might push against the values that we've given them. And that is it's a pretty normal thing to do. And I often say to parents, they do come back around again. They do just need to kind of push away for a bit, try on a different hat, go, I don't want to be boxed into anything. I'm going to dye my hair pink and get a nose piercing, and I'm going to be individual. And you're like, yeah, go for it. And then all their friends do exactly the same thing. And then they all actually look the same. Like, bless that, I need to rebel on some level of just finding my identity. And I think it's again, something to be very aware of, that this is just a normal part of what our children need to move through in order to figure out who they are. So I think there's so many different beautiful things in understanding about our teens, even things like their sleep rhythms, and it's harder for them to go to sleep later at night. Understanding that amygdala, the emotional center of their brain, often activates at night. So that prefrontal cortex, the thinking part of the brain, as it starts to get dark, starts to switch off. So studying late at night can often feel hard, but that emotional center activates. And it's often why when you walk past your teen's bedroom at 10:30 at night, you say good night. And then they're like, hey, Dad, can I talk to you for a minute? And then you're sitting on the edge of his bed for the next hour having a chat, which is brilliant. But you're like, could we have started this at 8 o'clock instead of 10:30?
I want to go to bed, mate. Come on.
Yeah. So that emotional center is often activated at night. And that's another good reason why, giving kids phones and technology late at night is often not a good idea, because that they're usually emotionally hardwired in those moments, and often they will be more reactive than logical, practical thinking. So, there's lots of different elements around that as well. So I think the thing to remember is that there is so much beautiful changes in development which are preparing our teenagers for young adulthood. And a lot of this stuff actually needs to happen where they find these edges, they try things, they make mistakes, so many mistakes, they get it wrong. And actually what they need is an adult that can stand beside them and go, yep, you made a mistake, mate. It's all good. I still love you. Do we need to repair? What do we have to do in order, to balance this mistake that's happened? But I get you and I've got it. And I know that this is part of development. And I think that is what helps teens to be honest and to share when they know that we've got their back no matter what.
I guess that's coming back to something you said earlier as well, isn't it? Having that safe space, knowing that they can come back to you, or a partner, and whether it's mum, dad, have it, grandpa, maybe, and having that safe space to come back to and really know that they can open up. And you've done that pre-work before they hit that stage of independence versus rebellion, maybe seeking. I think sometimes, isn't it, there's maybe a little bit of confusion between, is my young person becoming independent, or are they rebelling against the things that the values that I've put in place, or the expectations maybe that I've set. There's a fine line sometimes, isn't there?
There really is. And I think as a parent, what's really important to remember is that we've got to hold the connection for our kiddos even when they're pushing back on us. So it can be quite common for them to reject us or turn away, or you don't know anything, all that kind of stuff. And we can easily get offended with that. And we can easily be like, how dare you? I've driven you to soccer practice for the last 5 years, and all the things, right? All the things that are true at the same time. But I always invite parents to look behind the behavior. So when our kids are pushing back against us, right, it's like they're waving a red flag saying, I'm having a hard time, or I'm needing someone safe to push up against because there's a whole lot of feelings going on for me, which is often what teenagers will do. So I often talk about the teenagers, or all kids really, we have this big backpack we carry around. And it's often full of feelings. And, on an average day of a 14-year-old going to school, they might miss the bus in the morning. So then they get told off at school because they got there late. And then they
Mm.
get a maths test back that they thought they did well in and they didn't. And that doesn't feel good. And then at recess, they walk past a group of people and they all point and look at you and start laughing. And they're like, oh my God, are they talking about me? And then, you realize you forgot your money for lunch. And so you don't get to eat food. And then, all the stresses that go on, you don't get picked in the basketball team and, all the things that happen. And then you're worried about how you look and do you smell all right? And just,
Yeah,
it's a lot, right? And
yeah,
then by the time they get home, they're carrying that big backpack full of feelings. And what they're looking for sometimes is a place to put that. And, not all teenagers have the capabilities or the safety to walk in and go, gosh, my day was really hard. This happened and have a big cry and get it all out. Sometimes what they do is they carry that backpack in and they look for something to push up against. And so sometimes that's a parent. And when a parent says, no, you can't go to the party on the weekend, then all of a
mm,
sudden everything they've been carrying in that backpack comes pouring out in that one moment. You never let me do anything, and that's not fair. And our job in that moment is to keep our feet on the ground, take a really deep breath and look behind the behavior and go, they're having a hard time. And our job is to hold that love and connection even when, they're pushing up against stuff. Now, I also doesn't mean that we just let them get away with everything and we don't have boundaries. Absolutely, we need to have boundaries.
mm,
And we are also really modeling healthy, respectful conversations. And one of my favorite lines I say to teenage parents all the time is, particularly when our teenagers are pushing up or, stuff's going on, is to take a breath and say something like, I love you too much to continue this conversation right now, so I'm going to step away for a minute. Whereas we actually step away, leave the room, calm down so that we're calm and give them a second to be able to calm down and then kind of circle back and connect in and go, I can see there's a lot going on for you here. Let's talk about it. I've got you. I'm here. Let's go. But I'm not willing for you to talk to me in that way or swear at me, but I can see there's something going on. So our kids are constantly testing, can you hold me in the fire? Right? Even when I'm bringing my worst self, have you got me? Have you got my back? And I think it's really important that we keep remembering that what we often see on the outside isn't actually what's going on the inside. There is usually this front that they'll put up, and then behind that there's often, some feelings and worry and doubt and anxiety and all the things that sit there. And, our natural state is to try and diffuse that. So we often look for the safest person to push up against. And unfortunately, that is often the parents,
mm,
or a sibling.
yeah,
And that's big. It's really big. And I think it's important for parents to understand that, to keep that in context, to be
mm,
like, yep, they're having a hard time. I'm here, and really these teachable moments or coming back to it, we have those conversations when they're calm. There's often no point getting into the fire and the fuel, because then we just end up fighting it out and we become like a teenager and then nobody wins, right? We're trying to
yeah,
model empathy and compassion and that real groundedness and respect.
yeah. I think there's probably a lot of parents listening to this and probably thinking, "Oh yeah, that's my teenager right now. They're really
Mhm.
pushing my buttons." And yeah, I think that's a really beautiful analogy that you used about the backpack. And that's why I quite often when I go into schools and speak to young people, is
Mm.
that I often, you can sometimes, and you would have experienced this yourself, Lael, is when you go and speak to a group of, let's say, 150 young people, and there's a couple that are falling asleep, or there's a couple that might be
Mm.
chatting, and you're like, I often now think to myself, it's like, there might be something going on in that young person's life, and
Mhm.
they might be adding to that backpack, or there might be a lot of
Absolutely.
emotions in that backpack. And so I quite often think to myself, just let it go, don't let it bother you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
I think that's a great point. We need to not take it personally, which is not, it's hard to do when it's your child, right?
yeah,
But
yeah,
I think if we can take a step back and pause for a minute and look in and go, actually, what's really going on here, I think is a really important thing. And I mean, not only is so much change and development going on in that phase of their lives, so I think we need to be really compassionate to that. Like I often say to parents of teenagers, I really invite you to find the most awkward looking photo of yourself as a teenager and stick it on the fridge. So every time you walk past it, you'll be like, oh, God, you'll cringe and go, oh, I remember how hard that was, right? Because that is actually what it's like being a teenager. It's pretty tough. And I don't think we are very forgiving for them and the challenges that they are navigating. And I think when we can have more compassion and we can champion them and let them know, I'm on your team, man. I want you to thrive. I want you to figure out who you are. Like, I've got you back no matter what. And I'm going to hold this connection even when when you're trying to break it, even when you're pushing away, because I know this from speaking to teenagers and also the thousands of adults I've worked with. When I say to even the adults, if you were to go back to being 15-year-old you and you were pushing up against your parents and everything was feeling big, what is it that you really wanted in that moment? And they all say the same thing. I wanted my parents to be calm and look me in the eye and go, I've got you. This is hard. Tell me more. Like, I'm here, I'm listening, and to turn up for you in those spots, right? So that we feel seen and heard, because that's our fundamental needs. Now, sometimes that's just really tricky because our own stuff gets in the way. I often say, like, raising teenagers, like, you have to go through puberty all over again. It's full on, right?
Yeah.
All your stuff comes up, all your wounds about what happened for you. It surfaces whether you like it or not. And I think that that's where, as adults, one of my best advice, particularly with raising teens, is get some support for yourself. Like, get someone that you can talk to about how big it feels. Like, find a listening partner or someone where you can be like, my 15-year-old's driving me crazy, and we get to speak all the pieces that feel hard, because it's a massive thing that we're doing, and we often need the support emotionally to be able to turn up and be as grounded as we can for our kids.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really great point. And no, Lael, you've been really, really generous with your time, and I honestly could sit and speak to you for hours and pick your brain and probably ask you questions about my own parenting as well. But before you do go, I just have one final question for
Sure.
you, and it's that a lot of, I guess in today's day and age, families are becoming more and more diverse,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a lot of diversity in families, and sometimes, as a single parent, we might feel like we're doing all this work and we don't have that support person or a
Mm-hmm.
husband or a partner or whatever that
Yeah.
might be around us to sort of help us along that journey.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I guess first of all, that's probably a two-part question actually. So if I maybe have a partner that isn't along that journey with me, or isn't on the
Mm-hmm.
same page as me, how can I approach that? But then additionally, if I'm maybe a single parent, how is there ways that I can get support, maybe
Mm-hmm.
resources as well?
Yeah. Yeah. Look, it's one of the biggest questions that often pops up in any parenting, whether it's with a toddler or a teenager,
Mm,
is how do I get my partner on board, and I think this is where information's really powerful to remember that we often parent the way we were parented. And so often our partners can be very reactive or authoritarian, and that doesn't feel good for us. And then we're like, don't talk to them that way. And then they're often like, don't undermine me. And then, we're battling it out, and the kids are just sitting there going, can you guys get it together, please? Because this doesn't feel good,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And so relationship is hard. It's really hard. We bring all our own baggage to our relationship, and then we become parents, and it's on, it's not easy. So, I mean, my first thing I often say to people, when they're asking me, how do I get my partner on board, is I always just want to start with, we have to look through a lens of compassion, that we're all doing the best we can. We're all bringing our own kind of baggage and stories to the party. And so we're very good at judging when someone's not doing what we want. And so I think it's firstly, we are never going to get anywhere if we just come in with harsh judgment and criticism. Our default is to put our defenses up and to push back, right? That's what we do. So we have to kind of find a place of compassion and connection first, so that if you're having a conversation with your partner, you've got to come in a way where you both feel connected, and you're like, how's it feeling with the kids? And, what are the values we want for our children? And do we feel like we are living them at the moment? And, they're really good places to start where you're having those conversations. Sometimes parents need to hear it from someone else, not their partner. So, I run many parenting workshops, and I have couples come along and partners are like, when you say it, it makes sense. And then their partners are sitting there going, I've been saying the same
Yeah.
thing for the last 2 years. And I'm like,
Yeah.
don't take offense to that. Sometimes we just need to hear it from someone else.
Yeah. A different
So,
voice. Yeah.
yep. So sometimes, going along to workshops, hearing it from someone else, listening to podcasts, those kind of things can be good, but we can't make anybody do the work, right? And it is a challenging thing to navigate when we're on different pages as parents. I really do get that. But I often say, don't give up. Keep looking for extra support that's out there. Hang out with parents whose kids you like or that you feel are doing a good job. Talk to them, see what it is, because sometimes we need to hear it from outside of ourselves. So I think that's, my first kind of place I would start as far as if we're parenting on different pages. The other thing for solo parents, who I absolutely take my hat off to, I think they are the absolute heroes of our world. Raising kids on your own is not easy. And I just think it's such a monstrous job. You're often playing two roles when you are a solo parent. And I think, like we always hear, we need a village to raise a child. And sometimes that's not in our own house if we don't have a partner with us. So we need to outsource the village and we need to find that. And sometimes that can be family, that can be aunties and uncles and family. But a lot of the time it's not. We live away from our family. So it's finding familiar tribes. And maybe that is through a church. Maybe that is through youth places. Maybe it's through schools, communities, those kind of things where we hopefully find some like-minded people who, we can share a little bit of the burden with and our kids can be exposed to. And I often, used to say to parents too of teenagers, look, one of the things I said to my teenage kids growing up was, I don't care who you talk to as long as you talk to someone. And I'm like, there's going to be times where you're going to have a lot of beef about Dad and I, and you need to go talk to someone else. So go talk to your auntie or go and talk to, one of our very good friends who's known you since you were little. Like, they're all really safe adults in your world. Or, my kids sometimes have had therapy and they're like, yeah, I want to go talk to someone else, and I'm a big fan of that. And I really support that. Because what our teens often do is if they don't have safe adults to talk to, they default to talking to their peers, and their beautiful peers are lovely, but they're also going through the same stuff. So they may not have the wisdom and insight to share with you. So, how can we create adults in our kids' lives who are those safe adults who can also, that our kids know we can turn to when things are tricky? And I think that that's sometimes what we need to search for. I don't think it's as automatic as it used to be many, many years ago. I think it's something we actually need to put in place, to get that community to be able to, circle around a child.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, Lael, I just want to really thank you for your time in speaking with us today on the podcast, but also probably more importantly, actually, I just really want to thank you for the person that you are, what you do. I think genuinely you can feel the heart for what you do when you're speaking about it. And you've done some amazing things in your career. But like you said at the very beginning, your greatest joy is actually being a parent as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
thank you for sharing that joy with us today. And also, perhaps I'll just end by saying, you've got some really amazing books out there. Can you just tell us a little bit about a couple of your books, and then because there's maybe some really great resources that a parent could maybe go to.
Yeah. So my first book that I co-wrote is called Raising Resilient and Compassionate Children. So that came out a few years ago. So that is still a great book, even if you've got teens. It just really talks about feelings, understanding feelings and how we repress them and how we turn up for our kids and all that kind of stuff. So that one you can just find online. And my second book is about to be released in about 2 or 3 months. That's called Own Your Story. And that is all about how we were raised and the imprints we have, and then how that impacts how we turn up in the world. So it's not so much a parenting book, it's for anyone, but it really is about helping us understand ourselves more so we can have more flow and joy in life, really. I mean, that's the goal at the end of the day. So, that book is really about understanding your past so you can kind of create and change your future in the way you want. So, they're my kind of books at the moment. And, I also have lots of different courses and stuff on my website that, people can do. I've got a great course on teens and connection. If anybody, it's just a little webinar if people are wanting more tips and tools and stuff like that. So there's lots of different resources on my website.
Great. We'll definitely be guiding some parents down that track. So
Awesome.
thank you, Lael.
Yeah,
And
pleasure.
also amazing work with Seen, the documentary.
Mm,
So
thank
if
you.
you haven't seen that, there is still some screenings out there.
Yeah.
And definitely worthwhile. I can say that for myself with having watched it
Mm,
already. So yes, no, thank you very much, Lael, and we wish you all the best for the rest of the year and with the upcoming book launch for your second book.
mm,
Yeah, all the best into the future as well. So again, thank
thank
you.
you. Thank you
Thanks,
so
mate.
much.
Well, that's it for today's episode of Uncharted Parenting. As always, thank you so much for tuning in. We really hope you enjoyed this episode. We'd love to hear from all of our listeners. So if you have any questions that you would like us to answer here on the podcast, we want to hear directly from you. Send those questions in to us and we will be answering them right here on the pod. Please send them in to inquiry@encounteryouth.com.au. That's inquiry@encounteryouth.com.au. Remember, wherever you listen to your podcast, give us a follow, subscribe, send us a review, send in those questions by the bucket load, and remember, there is no map for parenting. You enter uncharted waters every single day, but there is a way forward. You're doing an amazing job already, and we're with you on that journey. We have some more amazing episodes coming your way very soon, but until next time, goodbye for now.